Welcome to the Talk to Me Petey D podcast. This is my podcast where I talk about people management, leadership, and productivity. I'm your host, Petey D. Welcome back. This is episode 19, Leadership Lessons from the Pit. Now, some of you may have a sense of what that means. Some of you may have no idea, but let's get into it. So, one of the things that I've observed a lot of adults do is sort of look down on youth culture, look down on adolescence, and even at their looking back at their own adolescence as kind of time lost or misspent youth and that sort of thing. So I was just reflecting a little bit about how some of the lessons from my teenage years have carried forward with me today and into leadership. And, you know, I was big into sort of the underground music scene in the mid 90s with punk rock and hardcore and things like that. You can see the Rancid Out Come the Wolves album Below Me in the back here. That came out right around the time that I was getting into that music scene. So it was sort of a reemergence of that, and to me, it sort of felt like the obvious place to be as a teenager. I know not everybody felt that way, and a lot of the values and lessons I learned from being a part of that scene, I think, in a lot of ways, prepared me to be a leader, a people manager, and to kind of take that philosophy into adulthood. So it wasn't sort of just wasted youth, so to speak. Not saying everything entirely about that scene was positive, but especially in retrospect and coming out of it, I'm incredibly grateful for those experiences, and I think they've shaped me a lot as a human being and as a leader. So let's get into it. Let's talk about some lessons from the pit and underground music and subcultures. So we talk a lot about empathy as people managers and as leaders. That was really something that I think being a part of an eclectic group of people like that helped me develop at an early age, being around a really diverse cast of characters and understanding where different people are coming from, different life situations, and just exposing myself to people that were both similar to me and different from me. And getting that experience at an early age really helped kind of set the foundation of understanding that people are in different situations. They may not be exactly like me, or they may in some cases, and being able to put myself in the shoes of another. And then, you know, being in a kind of subculture that maybe dressed or looked a certain way, and maybe stood out from sort of what people would conventionally look like. I had the experience of being judged for how I looked, or being judged by the group of people that I was with. So that was an interesting experience to be a part of that, and to have a better understanding of what that experience is to be judged by appearance or by a stereotype, and understanding the need to get to know people kind of underneath their outward extrinsic experience, but also kind of bringing that back into I've talked about executive presence, where how you present yourself is going to lead other people to make certain assumptions about you, for better or for worse. It's the reality. So living through that and having people maybe make assumptions about what you were about or what your belief system was simply by what you looked like. Now, I would say, on the other hand, one of the things that was an interesting experience about that is, if there were people that came up who were kind of outside of this scene and would talk to people and maybe have assumptions, they were often very open-minded to having a conversation about, maybe they assumed that people believed a certain thing and that wasn't the case, and they were generally pretty open to that. So that was also insightful, that you might not necessarily think that people who held a strong opinion about a group would be open to change. But I often found at a one-on-one level, people were. And sort of within the underground music scene, there were a number of different subgroups, and many with, different and contradictory values. But what I observed as sort of individual people, when those people as parts of those groups came together, they were able to interact and cooperate and get along in ways that were very surprising to me. So it was an interesting primer kind of on human psychology and group dynamics. And that's something that really plays in a lot to people management and leadership. Next, after empathy, was being able to adopt a contrarian mindset. Obviously, sort of punk rock is into rebellion and thinking about doing things differently than normal society. So you're sort of naturally in this contrarian viewpoint. Um, and I think that's useful in any situation, but especially in leadership where there may not be so much pushback on your ideas or things that you're putting forward. So being able to be self-critical, to put yourself in the opposite point of view, to be able to um, make sure your argument is strong by being able to take an opposing viewpoint. And also, just even within the systems that we're working in, to be able to take a step back and think, is this system really right for the culture or the goals that we're trying to support, and not just necessarily assuming that things are the way they are and that's how they should always be, but being willing to think outside of that and even go against maybe the system that you're in if that's ultimately going to lead to a better outcome for your organization and for your business. Um, it was also sort of interesting because um, being a very anti-establishment, at least on the surface group, it's sort of anti-hierarchy and power structure and things like that. But what often happens with groups like that, I think, and especially my experience here, is they start developing their own hierarchies and their own power structures within this group, sort of outside of the mainstream. So it's kind of interesting how our human nature for hierarchy and self-organization can happen even when you're within a group that on the surface is against that. And you probably see similar types of things, like I've seen that in engineering cultures, right, where you may be a flatter organization sort of reporting wise, but then within various attributes within the team, different hierarchies develop, maybe more based around subject matter expertise or other things like that. um, so it's just an interesting observation that even being within a contrarian type of subgroup, um, that these traditional hierarchies tended to emerge anyway. Um, so next, moving on to culture, we talk about that as something that's incredibly important in leadership and in business. That was absolutely something that was a a core component of being in sort of this subgenre, the sort of the underground music scene at that time. That it wasn't about sort of external values like having a lot of money or other things like that. It was more that embrace of the culture. And I think that was always a bit of a conflict for the artists that were in it, right? Where they were supporting this music that was very culture based, but at the same time, this is their profession, beyond, as they get into adulthood or other things, and how do you support yourself off of that? Um, so that caused some conflict, I think. But anyway, going back to the sort of the organizational side of things, that yes, people are professionals as you're running teams and organizations, um, but it's the culture is a really strong piece. And I know that this was sort of one of the first groups where I sort of felt that sense of belonging that I was looking for, and just realizing how powerful that is. And if you can recreate that within your teams and within your organization, that's going to make it much more cohesive, and it's going to make people want to stay there, you know, in addition to other rewards and things like that that they may have. But that piece of belonging is incredibly important. And so being able to experience that firsthand is helpful for me to think about how I can recreate that experience within, a business sense and in an organizational sense. Um, Within culture, and both sort of within this scene and even sort of within organizational life, I think the reality is you have to be self-policing of culture within your teams and within your organizations. HR has a piece and they set standards and things like that, but in the day to day, they're not there. They're not the ones modeling behavior. That's something that we have to do. And that was absolutely something that came out of this kind of underground scene, for better or for worse at sometimes. But um, the culture was maintained by the group and enforced by the group. And I think that's what you have to do in organizational life to maintain a healthy culture. And you want, as a manager, you want to instill that in your people, that they can be culture leaders when you're not there. And if things deviate from that, or it needs to get back on track, that they feel empowered and understand that they can step up and do that. And it's not reliant on you as the manager or organizational leader to do it, but you build those culture leaders within your teams and your organization. And sort of lastly, on the culture side, really having this culture of of accountability. Um, kind of the phrase, step up and keep your rep up. Like if you're sometimes there are things that you can say or do that there are going to be consequences for. So um, in organizational life and to be successful as a leader, I think you have to be aware of that and willing not only to go out and make strong statements where you think that's necessary, but understand that you're at times, even in very positive, inclusive, supportive organizations, you're going to face pushback, maybe criticism, maybe in other organizations, more outright attacks or things like that. And being willing and able to stand up and fight for the things that you believe in, obviously not in a literal sense in organizational life, but being willing to understand that you have strong values and strong beliefs, and that that may take some effort and some fight on your part to get those to success. Now, that's not to say that you have to fight for everything, right? Obviously, there's growth mindset. You want to hear feedback, but there are times when to be a strong leader, and I think to earn some of that respect, you have to be willing to fight for what you believe in and stand up and have hard conversations and hard discussions. Um, Next, in terms of topics, thinking about the DIY ethic, the do-it-yourself ethic, which was something that was huge in the scene at that time. Um, Very different in terms of technology and reach. There was no social media. The web was not what it is today. So being able to publish content independently, to get information out, to get people together that were interested in, a shared scene, that wasn't nearly as easy, and nobody else was going to come and do it. So being able to not just be sort of an audience member, but participate and to build the things that were needed to make what you wanted come to fruition. Nobody else was going to come and do it for you. And that's often true in organizational life as well. Like you can't always wait for somebody else or some kind of supporting organization to do it for you. Sometimes you can, but you may or may not be a priority in all cases. And sometimes you just have to go and be willing to go and do it yourself and build the things that you need. And I know this can be hard, right? You can end up in things with shadow IT, which there are all sorts of complications around. But at the same time, I've seen a lot of really solid innovation and solutions come out of that approach, even though it may not be ideal and may introduce some other complexity. So that the whole DIY ethic has been something that's been really helpful in my entire career, just to, if I see a need either for myself or for a team or for a group, to feel confident that I can go after it, and then we can make that change ourselves. We're not dependent on waiting for somebody else to do it. Um, Lastly, I think there was a real culture of hard work within sort of underground punk and hardcore scene, which may seem funny to people that weren't a part of it or sort of looking at kind of this outcast from society. But there was a lot of organizational effort that went into it. Many parts of the scene had really strong moral ethics and beliefs that they adhered to, um, and just being willing, combined with that DIY mentality, that to work hard and to put in that investment for the culture that you believe in. And I think that can carry you an incredibly long way in your career, either as an individual contributor or as a manager or organizational leader. And lastly, kind of leave on the concept of ideas or bulletproof, which was kind of a concept and an album from one of the bands in the scene, but just this idea that you have freedom of thought, regardless of the situation that you're in, the organizational structures, the complexity and dynamics of different stakeholders, different teams working together. You can always control your own thoughts, and you are free to think innovatively, to think however you want, and that's helpful to push for innovation. And I think just to have the courage to put our individual ideas forward. I think some of that comes out of that nonconformist background. Oftentimes, it's scary to be visible. It's scary to put ideas out there in a group where you may be wrong. And I know we try and build psychological safety and inclusive culture for people to do that, but nonetheless, there's still either perceived or real consequences to doing that. And I think having the courage to put yourself out there, and to potentially be criticized or at least noticed anyway was something I got a lot of experience with as a teenager, and that's carried me well into life and helped me be confident as an individual contributor, people manager, and organizational leader over the years. So that's what I got. This is something that's been on my mind for a while. Hopefully, it resonated with you. I think regardless of what sort of subculture you were in or group you were in, there's similar types of lessons and learning that you can take away from that and carry it forward. So I absolutely don't look at it as wasted years. So I hope you enjoyed. If you want more of me, other topics for me to discuss, please let me know. As always, check out my book, People Management from the Ground Up, available on Amazon now. No particular punk rock references in there that I can recall, but lots of discussion that I think it will be helpful to demystify what it takes to become a people manager and really how to be successful, kind of getting yourself set up in the first year. So please check it out. And thank you again for joining me on Talk to Me, PDD.